Jim and I were talking about guitars and singing and that kind of thing. But he's not going to repeat it now, unless you wish to. Yeah, just make sure it doesn't go on, will you?
I'm not used to that language.
Okay, we got Ralph and Philip back on again. Everything's good there? So welcome back, everyone. We're going to have a discussion tonight now on how that bycatch project, which I believe Rebecca Reed is going to deliver and will be supported. I think this is the third rendition she's given in the last 48 hours or 24 hours. She's already done so with Conference Board and PAG, and now she's doing so with the commissioners. Very much appreciate that. She'll be supported, I think, by Glenn, Mel, and by Greg as well, who will be able to answer any difficult technical questions that anybody may have for them. So, Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks very much. So you're right, this is my third time presenting this in 24 hours. And I have to say we have perfected the procedure now. And so a couple of changes we've made to the slides. And so people are comparing this particular version of the presentation to yesterday's. There's a couple of minor edits simply because some of the feedback we got suggested that perhaps what I thought was clear was less than clear. And so we fixed it. It's perfect now, though. And I do want to welcome Glenn Merrill, who's the Assistant Regional Administrator for NIMP in Juneau, as a co-presenter. We have also learned that co-presenting is slightly wrought with its own kind of challenges. So I'm going to go through the material, but Glenn is more than welcome to jump in at any time I start to become inappropriate. So, okay. And I should also say that the other thing I've learned in the past 24 hours is, well, actually I already knew this, but I wasn't clear enough about it at the beginning, is that I'm here representing the project team. There has been a huge amount of work done by a number of very technically competent people, and I'm not one of those people. And so as the questions are generated, I will turn to the team of people who have been very involved in the development of this, this work in order to answer any and every question that you can have. Okay, so on we go. Now, what I would like to do this afternoon is a couple different things. First of all, I'd like to report out on the project that was the commissioners asked us to work on at last year's annual meeting. And we'd like to describe some recommendations generated by the project team on how to address bycatch issues in the immediate term, and also to seek input on options and approaches for the longer term. And then finally, I want to talk about the next steps to implement these immediate term recommendations and longer term ones. Now, I do want to say that just by way of explanation, that what we were asked to do last year was develop a report. And so there is a report that's in draft form. It is available on the website. If you've had a chance to look at it, others have, you'll see that there's 4 objectives, which I'll describe in a moment, and the first 2 of which are substantially complete. I'm sure there's ways to make them better, but they're pretty good. Objective number 3, which I'll describe in a little while, is less complete. It needs some more work. And then objective 4 is substantially blank. And so the purpose of my coming to do the briefing today, in addition to, of course, providing information to the commissioners, is to really encourage some feedback, suggestions, comments about kind of where to with this project. And so the project itself, the report itself, has some blanks, and we're looking for help in completing that report through the types of comments and suggestions that we get today. I have had a chance to speak to the PAG and the Conference Board. I have summarized that in this presentation for your information, and those comments as well, I think, will be very helpful in informing where we go next. Okay, so I'm aware that everybody has a pretty good understanding of the issues, but I think just to catch everybody up so we can be at the same place, I wanted to provide some sort of background information quickly before we get to the questions and discussion points. And so there's no question about the impact of halibut bycatch on resource health and fishery yields. That's been a topic of importance for a number of years. And as a result, there have been a number of collaborative initiatives undertaken to look at bycatch and try and resolve some of the issues. For example, in 1991, which led to bycatch reduction targets in 2010, a work group which summarized progress against reduction targets and looked at effective bycatch tools. But challenges do remain. And so, as I'll show you in a table following, there is an estimated 10 million pounds of bycatch mortality annually, which reduces the annual CEYs. There are concerns around the adequacy of monitoring for numerous fisheries, and there is immediate and long-term impacts of bycatch on conservation of the resource. The move to a coastwide assessment, which recognizes halibut migration, has also renewed concerns about impacts of bycatch in one area on the available harvest in others. And so that's some of the rationale for why we are carrying on with this project. And so in recognition of this, a project team was formed. We were tasked with writing a report. Just like to recognize the members of that project team, which include myself as co-chair and David Witherell as co-chair on the U.S. side, all of the commissioners, and then Robin Forrest and Lily Lowe as the science advisors ex officio, and then Greg William as IPHC staff held the pen and actually wrote the report with input of a work group, which is led by Glenn Merrill on the U.S. side and Neil Davis on the Canada side, supported by a team of individuals. And so the actual work that was tasked links directly to how the report reads. And so in the report, the first objective is really information about the amount of halibut bycatch occurring in each regulatory area. And I'll provide you a summary of that. The second objective is to describe the understanding of the impact of that bycatch on conservation and allocation. The third one is to look at options for reducing overall levels of bycatch, and there are some ideas, need some further work. And then finally, the fourth objective, looking at options for mitigating the impact of bycatch in one regulatory area on harvest in the others. So that was our mandate. So the first question every good government worker asks themselves is, where do we get our instructions and our authority to do work? And so both Canada and U.S. have made commitments to address bycatch. First, in the U.S. Magnuson-Stevens Act, in Canada, the Fisheries Act, and also we have a Sustainable Fisheries Framework, which sets out a precautionary and ecosystem-based approach. And in addition to that, both countries have specific management measures to help address bycatch. And it's the implementation and progress which varies across regulatory areas. So on slide 7, here's a table of the bycatch mortality by area. And you can see it's collected for O26 bycatch, U26 in the total, which comes up to the 9.9 million pounds. Now, what we were trying to do with this slide was sort of position it, give it some context. What does that number mean? And so we tried a couple of different ways, and finally decided that the best thing to do was show it in a nice little pie graph here, which shows the commercial removals versus bycatch. You can see bycatch being 16% of the total removals. If you have read earlier versions of this document, you may wonder, we had some other percentages also described, but they're just confusing, and so we took them out. And so this, I think, is the best way to describe the impact of bycatch. Now, as far as rates go, they do vary widely amongst regulatory areas, and so you can see the numbers range from 2.08 pounds of bycatch to 7.39, 15 in the Gulf of Alaska. And so there is a range. And since 1991, since the bycatch reductions were implemented, some areas have progressed more than other areas. Everything okay?
I think we're missing the 2A line on here, so I wonder if the version we uploaded was not the most recent version.
Those numbers are different than the previous slide.
That's nice. Oh yeah, you're right. Huh. Okay. Well, there you go. And adaptive management in action here. So I'll just carry on, but I guess the point being that rates of bycatch have progressed more rapidly in some areas than others. So 2A and 2B, and I'll show you later with some slides, hoping they're in there. With the introduction of individual vessel accountability and 100% monitoring, very significant drops in bycatch, which we can show you. Now I'm all distracted and lost my place here. So in answer to the question around impacts of bycatch on stock health and conservation, which is part of the task, I've got some ratios that we've developed just to show you the impact of 1 pound of O26 bycatch, how it relates to present CEY. So you have a one-to-one relationship. If you look at the U26 bycatch to future CEY, it's 1 to 1.1. And then if you estimate the loss of CEY in a given future year at 11.38 million pounds at current, based on the current bycatch levels of about 10 million pounds. And so you can see the numbers change as you move into the future. You asked that same question around reduced spawning biomass and egg production. So the coast-wide female spawning biomass loss estimate estimated at 22 million pounds annually based on this 211 number of 9.99 million pounds. So that is to say 2.2 pounds of female spawning biomass loss for every 1 pound of bycatch. Now if you take that and estimate it forward about 30 years, right Greg? Mm-hmm. About 30 years, you end up with 1 pound of U26 bycatch estimated to reduce the future female spawning biomass by 6.6 pounds. So just trying to give you a sense of some context about impacts. Yeah, you know what? My slides and your slides do not match. That's very sad. So talking about impacts of bycatch on allocation, the out of area, or what you describe as downstream halibut removals in one area, reduce recruitment and yield in other areas. So there's some modeling work done in 211, and it's cited on the slide. It's in last year's RALA, and so I'm certainly willing to explain this in a bit more detail if there's questions around it. But essentially the modeling suggested that migration decreases the expected impacts of U32 bycatch mortality in Area 4, and it increases the impacts in other areas, particular Area 2. And that impact of U32 bycatch mortality in the Bering Sea is realized in all downstream areas. So except for Area 4, what we're saying is most of the impact of U32 bycatch in an individual area are due to bycatch from other areas. And so we will try and show this, how this looks in a bit. I've got a slide which attempts to demonstrate that a bit. Now the question which has been discussed a lot the past couple of days and in the past is around accuracy of bycatch information. And so due to there is significant variation in levels of monitoring amongst fisheries and regulatory areas, and so the accuracy of bycatch information for fisheries also varies. And so IPHC views and describes bycatch estimates to be minimum estimates. And so if you think about that and say, well, if the removals are being underestimated, what does that mean? It could mean current CEYs and harvest rates could be unsustainable. And so as a result of that, I think there is an acknowledgement about the importance of accurately accounting for all removals in order to sustainably manage the resource. Now I've got a series of slides. Oh my God, do you have like a really old version?
I wonder. Is that the one you gave me?
We have an old draft.
Maybe we just,
Yeah.
yeah, can you give, could I pause here a little bit and get ourselves organized, Mr. Chairman?
Bruce, while I paused, yesterday you showed us a table in here, I think, where it showed U26 and U26 bycatch by area. Remember where that was?
It's in Bruce's presentation. Wait, what? Should be on there. What, can you just mute the presentation first?
Actually need it?
Yeah. I gotta close this. Mr. Chairman, I think
Whatever piece of paper we have in front of us, we should just throw out. And
No, you might want to hang on. There was only a couple minor changes, and see, this is what.
just want to. Version should be in this book. Do we know?
Presentation is not.
Oh,
I didn't think so. Yeah.
no, I have some copies. I meant to pass those on.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's like a copy.
Yeah, I think Dave would like a copy. I assume that what Ralph and Philip see is just what they see on the screen, right? There's no other copy yet.
I should say, though, to people on the webinar that and the presentation will be posted. Okay.
I think it's on.
This is uh, it's very comparable.
Mr. Chairman, the first graph we have there was Alaska-wide, so it was Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska combined. Subsequent, now we're going to break them down to each individual region. So this new one here is for Bering Sea and Aleutian Island region.
All right. And, okay, so where are we? Slide 14. Yeah, so you can see the relative difference. And then moving to the Gulf of Alaska, groundfish over the same time series. On slide 16, is the BC groundfish dry catch. And, of course, the noted dry catch at the same time as individual introduced is quite marked there. A slide of the trial. And again, you can see at the same time as individual bycatch for the so taking describe some of the outside improve monitoring and reduce there are some outside and gaps. Organize those being stopped practices. The second so opted for the size of the fishery, and a question before about absolute. And so the global CEY US. the next slide, we'll see if it helps or not to explain that concept. And no regulatory policy or area accountability for U26. So that is just bycatch in the current say all areas are impacted by a harvest policy. That is U26 bycatch, even without accounting for that migration. Down you see is the last yield bycatching area being described for each of those regulatory areas according to which area has the bycatch. And so it's a modeled scenario, and we cite the paper below if you want to have a look at it further. But it's a scenario of estimated loss yield in millions of pounds each area due to U32 bycatch mortalities. And so the colors, which hopefully you can see, represent the areas for U32 bycatch occur. The percentage of local origin is noted. So, example, pick the big one because it's easier to see. In area 3A, you can see the red corresponds to the red legend. So this is our attempt at being bycatch mortality that occurs from the bycatch in area 3A. And so for each of those regulatory areas, you
language is correct. There is no, within this model, there is no, since net migration, there is no western migration, it's all one way.
It doesn't really matter how long it was simulated for. It's just the relative impacts are going to stay the same, whether it's 30 years or 50 years.
It's 100%.
Sure.
But the proportional amount of lost yield would change depending upon. Sorry, but I guess maybe as a point of clarification is that the the amount of lost yield, the absolute lost yield, would change depending upon the time frame that you're using to run the model. Is that correct?
The total amount.
Yeah.
But it would also depend on the time frame, but on what the initial bycatch inputs are. You can repeat that.
Yeah, it depends on what the initial bycatch amounts are, what the inputs are into the simulations, as well as migration rates across areas. So this was done to try to get an illustrative view of how these impacts might be distributed across areas. It's not intended to be an exact, accurate, precise, this is the number kind of output.
I guess, I appreciate modeling is what it is. I'm trying to figure out how, for policy decision-making purposes, how this helps us. Like I can't, I'm just stupid, I guess. I can't get a good sense from that about what it's telling me about the magnitude of the problem or not. And the assumption that it's all one way, okay, that's one thing. It still has to be, I guess, validated. But the magnitude of the problem is it's the green bars, so it basically is saying this, for example, B of the bycatch assumes what? That fewer fish. Can somebody explain that to me? Why would the green bar be higher in the third column than in the second column?
Mr. Chair, and into the future. So these are future. Among other things, other variables.
Okay, so would it be fair to interpret, sorry to belabor this, that the bycatch impact of in 4 on every other regulatory zone is quite significant? I mean, it's varying, but quite significant over time, with the exception of 2A, where the bycatch impact is much more what is taken in 2B, as opposed to, is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I would caveat that answer by saying this simulation was done with migration rates from our pit tagging study. Sir.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my point, is that all of this migration from 4 is not very well documented, particularly on the smaller fish. For some of that, they cited in Ray Hilborn's paper, which actually never got into the Bering Sea. So I think that this is a correct model result, but I don't think it is necessarily data-driven migration rates from area 4. So half of area, we're saying Bering Sea, but area 4 is half in the Bering Sea and half not in the Bering Sea. And so we don't know if any tags, or I don't right now, I don't know the part of the area 4 tags which we attribute the recovery to the east came above the chain. So maybe no Bering Sea tags. This just says Area 4.
Mr. Chairman, I might clarify this a little bit. This was what was called the 2M migration scenario in here, so it includes the adult migration or the pit tag migrations for the fish tagging the pits on the pit tagging program.
But at a date based on progress that's been going on in Area 4. Or is it? Oh yeah, in Area, where was it?
So, but I think I can
Yeah.
be fairly brief here, Commissioners. I had mentioned earlier during the Alaska report some of the changes that have occurred in our observer program, and those would correspond to some changes in Area 3A and B, and then also in 4 as well. Most of those changes are changes that occur in Areas 3A and B, with the movement towards a random deployment for those vessels that are partially subject to observer coverage, and then the expansion of our full coverage category so that a larger proportion of the fleet is subject to full coverage relative to the observer program that we had last year. So I think this table may not fully address some of the changes that have recently been implemented just this year. So obviously this was prepared prior to this meeting, and I think I talked about those a bit during my Alaska report. But if you have other questions on that, I'd be happy to answer those.
Accuracy of information is very important. There are gaps, and you can point to gaps in each of the regulatory areas, some broader than others. There's questions about whether the objectives are were able to accurately estimate bycatch in areas 2C, 3, and 4. And but as Glenn said, work is progressing, and so there may need to be further evaluation on that point. So moving forward, the project team has identified several steps for immediate term to begin addressing some of these issues. And then there's some broader, longer-term options, which first 23 slides were to try to provide some context, which said, we think bycatch is important. We think it's something we need to pay attention to. Here's some of the impacts we see. Here's some areas that are important. Now, what should we do about it? So, not to say that the data is perfect, but I don't think there's any question about the compelling need to look at bycatch in a very serious manner, as has been recognized for a number of years. So what to do in the short term? We have some suggestions, and they really are with regards to making sure that we have the right information and ask some further questions. So the first one requests IPHC staff to identify and analyze options for incorporating uncertainty which arise from bycatch estimates into the stock assessment, and factor uncertainty into catch levels established for each regulatory area. The next suggestion is that science advisors, we could use simulation studies to model downstream impacts of bycatch. The third one is to request IPHC staff to identify and analyze options for addressing treatment of U26 bycatch in the harvest policy for project team review. And so again, we wanted to see what it would look like rather than saying we should do this or that, but simply look at a range of options and understand the implications before we made a further recommendation. Include IPHC assessment of monitoring programs planned for the Gulf of Alaska in the bycatch report. It's presently a gap. and for DFO to determine monitoring levels and bycatch estimates for shrimp trawl and crab pots in 2B, and provide methodology for determining estimates to the IPHC, which has been identified as a gap. So longer term, I'm not sure if I explained properly, these longer term options were not reviewed by the project team per se, and so what we did was, in trying to move Objective 4 forward in a helpful way, gathered up all the ideas that had been written down or stated that we could point to, and essentially wrote them down. So this list is not an endorsed list. It's simply suggestions that have been put forward by various people at various times for your consideration. So there could be some good ideas. You might not like the discussion with this have been proposed. Establishing updated Canada and U.S. bycatch reduction targets, authorizing currently prohibited gear types to retain and sell halibut, defining minimum standards for catch monitoring reporting, which could include implementing 100% monitoring, establishing individual vessel accountability for all bycatch, considering time and area closures, that is, identifying areas which might be designated as nursery grounds, define areas with high bycatch as areas of special concern, and reducing the catch limits accordingly, and adjusting catch limits upward in areas that have minimized bycatch and implemented high standards of monitoring. And so a list of ideas for your consideration. I wanted to also provide you with, no, this is the slide that's missing. We did meet with the PAG and the conference board yesterday, and so I wanted to provide to you some of the comments that they provided, but if it's okay, I'll just go get my notes so I've got it accurately. This might be an excellent time for a question. Okay, so just wanted to report on you accurately, so I didn't try and do it from memory, the initial feedback. So I met with the Processors Advisory Group and the conference board, and I do have a summary, and I apologize, I had actually intended to include a slide in here, but obviously copied the wrong file. So the PAG, the numerous questions about the assumptions underlying the estimates of long-term losses in yield and female spawning biomass and impacts due to migration. So there's a number of questions, you know, sort of along the lines of some of the questions we've heard already in this discussion around, you know, what does the data mean? Where did it come from? And I would also comment that Area 2A and 2B's experience demonstrates that it is possible to minimize halibut bycatch, but still get target catch out of the water. So that point was made clearly as well. So those are the general comments from PEG. I know that Greg actually met with them for an additional half hour today with some further questions. So Greg, do you want to add to that summary?
Mr. Chair, most of my discussion with them was just clarification of material from yesterday, so I don't have anything substantive to add at this point. It was a very engaging discussion we had with them, though.
And so then the conference board feedback, concern that directed fisheries will bear the burden of reduced catch limits this year while bycatch and other fisheries continue. There's frustration with the rate of progress in reducing bycatch in some areas. There was a noted lack of support for some of our ideas, particularly providing retention or sale of halibut by prohibited gear types, which is, actually if you want to maybe just show them the list of things where there was noted lack of support. So there was support for clear identification of outstanding gaps and issues related to bycatch monitoring and management. A lot of interest in that. Interest in the IPHC assessment of monitoring program changes in Alaska, and support in principle for the proposed options and approach. So not to say that they loved every idea, but they liked the idea of having a list of options that could be reviewed and discussed further. And they also said that they would be providing additional feedback, which I believe they are doing. Oh, I see what's I've gone. Okay. So on the next steps here, what we'd like to do now is confirm timelines for implementation of the immediate term recommendations, including building whatever we agree to do into the IPHC staff work plan for recommendations which implicate their resources. And so essentially, if we are going to do some work, which I hope we agree to, that it be resourced and factored in, because as Robin and others have noted, some of the work that we've asked for is significant and isn't a side-of-the-desk type project. So we do need to consider that seriously in setting our ambitions for the future. The next one is to initiate a project team discussion on those broader, longer-term options that we've proposed to you in accordance with the objectives. And we'd like to do that this spring, or have those discussions completed, so that we can complete a revised bycatch report reflecting those conclusions on longer-term options, make them available for public comment. And we'd like to do that by the summer of 2013. And then finally, I think that if we can make that progress, then the question about what we come back to for the next interim or annual meeting, I do think it would be useful to have an implementation plan written in place with agreed upon strategies, specific actions, timelines, and project leads set out, and if possible, progress reports provided for the next reporting period. Do you have anything?
Okay, many thanks, Rebecca, for that presentation, and really to you and the other members of the project team and the working group for all the work that you have done, and especially your leadership, Rebecca, in advancing this since the annual meeting last year. So very much kudos to you and the rest of your gang in that regard. Can we put up the slide on immediate recommendations? Because one of the next step suggestions, the first one, was that we should be seized of those recommendations and determine what we want to think about it. But let me first open it up to commissioners for any general comments or questions. Anything from Philip or Ralph? Okay. Who else would like to, who wants to start us off? Paul, you're usually good at starting us off.
Yeah. Well, why not? I had an electronic pointer and I thought this was the perfect opportunity to use it, and then I forgot about it. So, anyhow, you know, clearly there's been a lot of work done over the last year, and to echo your comments on it, Michael, I think given that there's been a significant body of work done, I think it provides some clarity about the bycatch issue that we're experiencing. And it seems to me it kind of falls into a couple of categories as far as what we're trying to do. And first off, I think we need to, while we've made a lot of progress in accounting for the bycatch mortality, it seems to me there's still questions around, you know, exactly what those numbers are. And there's always going to be uncertainty, but I think there seems to be still some more effort that needs to be expended upon that. And then I think the other big issue that comes out of this, and I think it was the bar chart that was put in that showed a model, and don't need to go back to talk about the numbers in there, but I think what that bar chart was trying to show was where the bycatch occurs and what the impacts are on other regulatory areas. And so not to debate the numbers, I don't think that's really the issue, but I think the point is there's an impact and it's spread across all regulatory areas, but the bycatch is not spread across all regulatory areas to the same extent. And I think the other point, too, that I'd raise is that the current way that bycatch is treated, at least for the under 32. My understanding is that it's treated as natural mortality, which then means that all are paying for it. And so we haven't really talked too much about that. I think we talked a bit about it yesterday, but I think that's another issue.
Do any of you want to comment on what Paul just said? Or hold those thoughts? Jim?
I guess I'm wondering whether there's any value in doing more simulation studies if in fact we have to reach so far for assumptions on migration rates. I mean, the simulations that we're showing here with the green bars that we talked about briefly, unless you have better, if you have some real migration rates based on real data, and you can actually demonstrate fish moving in the Bering Sea, as opposed to assuming that that's what they do because that's what they did in Shumagans 25 years ago. Unless we get better real data, I don't see much point in doing more simulation studies. The point has been made there that maybe there's big impacts. Okay, we've done that, so I don't know why you want to do any more on that. I think effort, instead of simulating things, let's see if we can find some way to discover if fish grow through Unimac Pass. I think that's imperative, you know, and we have things like the bycatch downstream of the impact downstream of bycatch, for example, in 3A and 2B. Well, much of that's over 26 bycatch, so it's a 1 per 1 deal. Some of it's less, so it's 1.1. But there's also an impact of directed harvest out of those areas. So if we're really trying to discover how to get more fish to 2C and 2B and to 2A, it may not only be a question of reducing bycatch. Maybe it's a question of reducing target fish. Maybe it's the U.S.'s choice as to whether you want to catch 26 to 32s in the trawl to support a polyp fishery and reduce the directed sable halibut fisheries out there. So I think the focus on bycatch, particularly on over 26, is wrong. It's a focus on the removals of fish above 26, and regardless of the gear type that's used. You may be able to make a case for the smaller fish because we don't know who they're going to recruit to. But I don't know why a 026 fish on a hook has a bigger impact on Canada than a 026 fish in a trawl. And if I'm missing something, maybe that'd be something we could study here. I actually don't know that there's. I'm wondering about the first bullet as well, because we've got this decision chart right now, which has some levels of uncertainty in it, which apparently has proven completely unuseful for our purposes in selecting and edging towards quotas this year. So I'm not sure it's time to incorporate more uncertainty into the decision table until we figure out how we're going to use that decision table. So I'd slow that down. I'd slow down the simulations. I'd work a little bit more on the decision table to see if we can make it more useful. Of course, I don't know how we will end up ultimately choosing quotas. If they come off the decision table and we can point to it and say that's why we did it, then I'll say, okay, I was wrong. But I'm not sure that we're using it in its form. So adding another level of uncertainty, I don't see the utility at the moment. And I'll stop there.
Other comments, commissioners? Paul?
Just focusing on the slide 24, I guess for me, I'd be interested in hearing from the science advisors, and whether it's drafting questions or not. I do think there is utility in simulation studies. My understanding is there's information available, which is going back to that bar chart slide. That's what it was based upon, and I think to me it's utility in exploring that further, and I would be supportive of it. So that would be one additional point I'd like to make.
Okay, anything from Ralph or Philip? Dave, do you want to give any comments? Okay, a couple of thoughts from me. One is I think I would like to certainly ask, and we can talk about this further in the context, as we've already started on research and research priorities. We should definitely be seeking both from the scientists within the staff and from the science advisors, using their, and with our support from Greg as he supports everything else related to this issue, to put their minds together to see what would make sense as far as next steps on scientific analysis and research. We've already talked earlier about the fact that we need updated information on migration patterns, and I'm certainly with Paul in the sense that I don't think we should limit that only to updated tagging because it's the time it takes to get results from that. We should do that or be focused on that. It's expensive, but make some effort absolutely in that, but not assume that we can't do other studies as well. We have to make a judgment at the end about how reliable those are, on what basis we can use that information that such studies would reveal. But I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't undertake the studies. But I really would look to the scientists to give us their best sense of what would be the best way to approach that. No one seems to have argued to the contrary. I am impressed, shall I put it that way, the extent to which the earlier slides showed the nature and amount of bycatch that takes place in different areas. Over time in particular, and that gives us a good sense of where progress is or hasn't been made with respect to managing or mitigating that bycatch. I would ask the question in the context of the experience with 2A and 2B, what would and would not be transferable as an approach in other regulatory areas? I mean, simply because we have dramatic downward shifts in bycatch in 2A and 2B as a result of the changes that have been made there, shouldn't automatically assume you'd have the same impact if you adopted those changes. But I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's an important question that should be asked is whether if you adopted identical management measures in other regulatory areas where you, number one, could you do so, and number two, would you be presuming that they would have the same implication? Because it's not clear to me one way or the other whether they would. They may, I just don't know. So I do think further, there is sometimes a presumption that because it's worked in a certain area, you've had that impact, it automatically will work in another area if you extend the same approach, and maybe that is the case, but I don't know whether that's the case. So further analysis on that I think would be helpful. I want to highlight as well the challenge of, whether it's for simulation purposes or tagging information and so on, also the importance of, as comprehensive as possible, data collection. So there's been a lot of conversation about the sources of bycatch and the by gear type, shall we say, and the degree or volume of such bycatch. But we also know that there is very unequal observer coverage and in some cases, I think as some of the earlier slides said, in some cases none at all. And I think it's important that any gear type that is involved or has a potential implication on how the bycatch should be looked for or looked to increase and improve the coverage that they should be allowing to happen, the observer coverage, I should say, for the purposes of getting as much information as possible to be able to make sound management decisions about how to manage that bycatch. And I know that's a challenge in particular. Obviously, in Alaska, there's a major discussions going on. I appreciate and some steps that are being taken. We heard a bit about that this morning as well, in the context of some of the fisheries. But I do think that it would be very helpful if we could impress upon all gear type owners involved that they should be collectively looking to increase their commitment to providing, through observer coverage or other means, electronic monitoring, et cetera, as Dave has raised, for more information, more accurate information, more up-to-date information on halibut bycatch, so we can make sound decisions on the basis of that more information. And I think that's totally consistent as well, obviously, with our national policies of both countries, which are very clear about that. One other point, which is, I think, in relation to all the immediate term recommended on a time frame for further discussion and analysis. I think it would be helpful if we can demonstrate through decisions this week that not only do we remain committed as we have in the past to seeking solutions to this, but that we define, as we did last year, a concrete plan for further action. So I didn't get any comment yet so far from my colleagues, commissioner colleagues, as to whether the plans or ideas beyond the pros and cons of each of the recommendations or options, are people prepared to support the time frame for that additional work to be done? I think you talked about it by the end of the summer, right, Rebecca, of being able to assess not just or have clear progress on the immediate recommendations, but also on those long-term options to further analysis, whether they're credible or not, or usable or not, or possible to pursue or not. And I think it's important as commissioners that we are clearly giving direction to our respective teams to continue the momentum of that work and to have, along with the additional science and the work that gets done in that regard, have a useful, as possible, a useful discussion in the next cycle of meetings, starting with the September meeting that we have, work session, I think we call it, right? The interim meeting and the annual meeting next year. So we can kind of demonstrate as, on an annual basis sort of the activities and measures and decisions we're making with respect to this issue, that I think we owe it to all of our stakeholders to show that, but not just to ourselves, I think, to show that. But I'd be interested in the views of other commissioners and others about that point. Okay, we'll stop there. Is there something from Philip or Ralph? Please.
Yes, there's one comment from Philip who wants to add for consideration that halibut bycatch also impacts customary and traditional users and not just the business industry.
Are there any other comments right in this moment from Dave, please?
Well, I'd like to sort of reprise some comments that or some thoughts that I tried to put out there during the interim meeting, and also I think in part in the first day of this meeting, and that is the changes to the model that we've seen this year with the attendant reduction in the estimates of recruitment and the downward trend of those estimates signals perhaps a real crisis point. Heretofore, we've been thinking that although the exploitable biomass, which we now define as O32, but I actually think ought to be redefined as all sizes of halibut that incur any kind of fishing mortality whatsoever, but that's another whole discussion. That we ought to be doubly cautious about the effects of bycatch on recruitment into the fishery, because if the natural productivity is dropping, the potential small fish that will grow into exploitable fish are doubly precious. And I think it's really incumbent upon fish managers on both sides of the border to look at any and all ways that bycatch mortality of halibut and of every other fin fish and shellfish and everything else can be reduced. And I see, there's a quote here from the Magnuson-Stevens Act, talks about as far as practicable, and I don't think in either country we've gone nearly as far as is practicable. I can certainly see places in my fishery where we could reduce bycatch mortality of halibut, and we should. It's the right thing to do. It's the sensible thing to do. And sometimes they say out of crisis comes opportunity. I think we're in a stock crisis here. It's the lowest it's been for 30-some years, and may be in real jeopardy. This is a time to act, particularly given that we have relatively new knowledge of best practices that can be applied to this problem. So I'd just like to encourage everybody to quit studying it and do something.
Thanks, Dave. One more chance for commissioners. Peter? Paul?
Michael, I think a number of your comments were around next steps, and one of them was about the time frame that's on slide 26, about the 3 bullets that are on that slide. It seems to me a sensible thing to do. I would endorse it. I think we have made progress over the last year, and I think that's because we laid out a roadmap to get to where we are, and I think this would move us ahead.
Okay, can I offer an opportunity for anyone else to comment or question? I'll come to you in a minute, Bruce. Just let's see if there's anyone else in the room who has an interest in doing so. This is the advantage of having conference board and PAG meeting at the same time, right? They're not all in here seeking to ask questions. But I'm glad very much so that Rebecca, you and the team had the chance to brief them. So it wasn't just a conversation with us. It's everyone, I think, who are seized of this issue has had a chance to have a good discussion with you. So I'll be very much interested. I think you all will in what they have to say about this and their recommendations to us tomorrow. We'll see. Okay, so Bruce, what would you like to say?
Back to slide 24 there, please. So I'm just looking at these and thinking about it, and I obviously I want to talk this over with our team to see what's in the art of the doable here. I certainly would say that bullet number 3 is probably deep into Steve Martell's thinking already in terms of how we're dealing with the harvest policy. So I would think, Steve, that's already part and parcel of your thinking on it. Probably the ones that I have the questions about, number 1, yeah, you can put uncertainty into things. I'm not sure. I think to some extent I agree with you, Jim, on this, that I don't know that any additional uncertainty here is going to advance our abilities on this. But the second question, I would be very interested to know what exactly the science advisors might be talking about here, in the sense of we don't have any new information to inform the assumptions that go into the analyses that we've done here. So I would be very much interested to see what sorts of questions they would be interested in posing here and how we might address them. So.
See if Robin or Lo would want to make a comment on that, and then I'll come back to you, Jim. Just wanted to be able to respond directly to that question. Robin, do you want to come down to this corner, maybe?
Bruce, I was behind a pillar when you were pointing to the bullet. So are you talking about the science advisors to draft questions point? Yeah, my response when I saw this bullet point was that this wouldn't be something that the science advisors would draft on their own, and that this would be something that this will be a broader conversation with commissioners and with your science staff as well. But maybe Steve Martell or Ian would be able to talk to this a bit more. My thinking when we were talking about developing simulation studies was not to do more studies of the type that we've already seen. just trying to find different ways to quantify impacts, because I agree with Dr. Bolsinger that we've done that and we have a lot of uncertainties. My thinking was that it would be more about trying to characterize the range of uncertainty that we have in our estimates of bycatch given the uncertainty that we have. So at least we could possibly see the range of uncertainty that we're dealing with and what it means in terms of our understanding of impacts, you know, ranging from scenarios where there's no migration to where there's some maximum assumed migration perhaps. And another might be to try to identify where the gaps in the knowledge are that most strongly affect the harvest policy or the decisions that we need to make. So perhaps, as I alluded to this morning, to identify where perhaps tags would need to be deployed or on what size classes they would need to be deployed to get at some of these questions which are priorities to the Commission at the moment. So that was my thinking, but it's not me that's going to be doing this work, so, you know, should it happen. So I think perhaps perspectives from your science staff might be worthwhile.
Do Ian, you or Steve want to make any comments at this time? Ralph and Philip, Steve's writing furiously in his notebook, so I suppose that's a good sign. And Ian, you just keep it all in your head, right? It's sort of, you remember it all. So, okay, did that answer your question a little bit, Bruce, as far as the thinking? Anything else, Bruce, you want to comment on? Okay, any other final comments on this? Just in terms of process, as I think you had said, Rebecca, you had made a few edits, minor edits, or to as a result of the conversations you've had. Do you, if you want, maybe when you finalize those, it will make them available, or they will be part of the annual meeting report, I guess, or is that the best way to go about it? What do you think, Steve? Yeah.
Yeah, we actually, I mean, we do have an updated presentation. We just simply loaded the wrong version. That's why the flurry.
Okay, so that, when it's ready, if there's any final tweaks you want to make to it, then that will be made available to everybody as part of the meeting report in the near future, I guess, or as part of the documents table at the meeting. Jim, sorry.
Yes, I quite like what Robin said. I suggested that there was a little point in resimulating the same kind of thing under the with no ability to improve the assumptions, but I think she actually has an extremely good idea that we could examine the sensitivity of that model to assumptions. And so she said bracketed at no movement to lots of movement. I think maybe there's I'll retract my previous statement where I said I don't think that's useful. I think it would be extremely useful in that regard.
Okay, and if I can suggest that during the F&A discussion on the budget, and I would encourage the science advisors as well as our senior science staff to participate in that, we can talk about nominal allocations as appropriate for that kind of research, not specifically simulation per se, but just as part of our demonstration of the commitment we want to make to doing needing the further analysis on this, that can be done through decisions that commissioners are making at this meeting about allocations of resources for that purpose, if you agree, Jim. But we can flesh that out a little bit further during the F&A discussion. Okay, any other final comments from anyone? Ralph and Philip, you're still with us? Okay. You know, it's like the person who is in a coma. If you lift your finger, you can say you're still. I'm kidding. So, okay, we're almost right on time. It's just past 2:30. Can we take a 15-minute break, and then we'll move into F&A / executive session, I guess we call it. So that's for those of you who don't know, that's a closed session